Very nice. Well, good noon, everyone. A brief introduction about Tejas Cyber Network. We are a global community of cyber professionals. Tejas in Spanish means a friend or ally. We are all about long-term friendships. And in yoga, it means strong inner strength or brilliance. And we have some really brilliant people amongst us. We are a global, project-oriented, vendor-agnostic, and self-sustaining community. We are membership-based. We are open to all. And we just don't cover security professional. We also welcome privacy, audit, risk compliance, people who are doing product management in cyber, or people who are writing code in cyber, engineering folks as well. So we have a fairly diverse membership. Our mission is to touch maximum number of people and create maximum impact in our lifetime. We have one life to live, so we are going to go max on everything. We have some key design principles. The first one is that everything we do has to directly benefit you, otherwise we don't do it. Our second design principle is that we have very strict professional standards and we enforce them so that people can trust each other. We are a project-based community. And the reason we call them projects, because when we say project, it means work. So we do actual work. These are the few projects or themes that we focus on. One theme we focus on, how do we prepare the next generation of cyber leaders? Second thing we focus is entrepreneurship. A lot of practitioners just keep thinking about entrepreneurship, but they never do it. So we are trying to create a vibe where people say, no, I can do it. I'm going to start a cyber company, product-based cyber company. Project test is around skills, technical management and life skills. So this session is actually under project test, because where we all of us are due to our skills that we gain knowledge, and it's a journey towards learning. One thing which is very interesting, which is we also focus on health. We want a sustainable success for you. How do we get people started on their own journey to build physical and mental resilience? Because just not a physical game, it's also mental. Especially cyber is very stressful. So that you develop this resilience to face adversity with equanimity. Bad stuff will always happen. Stress will always be there. But if you can handle with equanimity, then we can respond versus reacting to adverse situations. And we recently kicked off Project J, where we help people thrive in their careers. Now to the real presentation. Everyone with me so far? Okay, we have 130 people, so good audience. Again, welcome all. This is going to be very interesting. I think this was just like a funny disclaimer I put. This presentation has not been developed using LLMs, but using the old school sacred and secret RTFM methodology, which is reaching extinction today's age. So please Google RTFM if you're not aware of it. So I did RTFM to develop this presentation. Claude Mythos preview. So this was recently launched on April 7th, so it's barely like 5 days old. It's a general purpose language, large language model. So it's not specialized where, some of the LLMs could be domain specific, but this is a general purpose large language model from Anthropic. It's their most capable frontier model. So these labs, these companies actually called frontier AI labs. And their latest models are called the frontier models because they're literally at the cutting edge. According to them, it has striking leading scores on many of the evaluation benchmarks, and we'll be talking about these evaluation benchmarks. And the previous model they had was called Claude Opus 4.6. And there were others before as well. And some of their internal documents which were leaked from a configuration management system, it pointed to that it had about 10 trillion parameters, and it used a mixture of expert architecture. So publicly, they haven't basically said anything about what's new, was there technical breakthrough or whatnot. So this is what we have, what we know so far, that 10 trillion parameters, mixture of expert architecture, and the internal code name is Capybara. So as per Anthropic, it says it has already identified thousands of zero-day vulnerabilities. And this is actually as we go through the presentation, this is going to become very interesting, critical, high versus zero-day vulnerabilities. And how do we examine these claims? and they said that there was a super large increase in capabilities, and that's why they decided not to make it generally available. And they made it available to a limited set of partners, which is the Project Glasswing, and we'll talk about it. And they put themselves to a 90-day timeline where they'll report publicly on what they learned and what they fixed and any improvements which they can disclose publicly. So this is literally the big claim, and it's right from their own documentation. And it says that used an agentic harness with minimal human steering, and they were able to autonomously find 0 days in both open source and closed source software. And in many cases, develop the identified vulnerabilities and working proof of concept exploits. So again, didn't do POCs in every case. In some cases, it's just reports. But in some cases, they were able to get proper exploits and POCs around it. And the other keyword here is agentic harness. Again, it's going to be very interesting when we talk about agentic harness. Like, what does it really mean? But again, when they made the claim, they also put a disclaimer, which people are actually not talking about. And again, this is from their own documentation, which says, we are unable to state with certainty that these vulnerabilities are definitely higher critical severity. So basically, all the claims, which are in media, not deterministic, because it's them saying we are unable to state with certainty that these are higher critical severity. But in practice, we found our human validators. So what Anthropic did was they hired a lot of security contractors. And when these reports came, these human validators / contractors did manual checking of all these vulnerabilities, where they were true positive or not. The second, big disclaimer is that they only tested 198 of these reports manually. The rest basically are all automated, which again raises a little bit of an eyebrow, because literally, like, you hire a pen tester, and pen tester will use a vulnerability scanner to find all the vulnerabilities. But then you have to check whether these are actually exploitable. So, the difference between a vulnerability scanning report and a pen test report is night and day. Tons of stuff, very few properly validated findings. So again, I'll let you make your own conclusion that the automated system find quote unquote thousands of vulnerabilities, but out of those, only 198 of them were manually reviewed. And then they made an extrapolation. Extrapolation is that we have some data, and we are going to say, based on the data, if this is true for this subset, it will be true for the larger subset. So they made an extrapolation, which if these results hold consistently for our remaining findings, so which they did not test manually, the human security contractor did not test, we would have over 1,000 more. So again, the keyword here, we would have, it's not that we have, we would have over 1,000 more critical severity vulnerabilities and thousands more. So again, 1,000 more critical and thousands more high severity. So there are two different categories, 1,000 more critical and thousands more high severity. So there are two classes of vulnerabilities, critical and high severity. Critical are smaller, and high severity are thousands. But this is an extrapolation, which is that if it holds true for the small subset, it holds true for the larger subset as well. These were some of the classes of vulnerabilities that were disclosed either with a POC or a report. So again, not in all cases they gave a proof of concept. In some cases, it was just a report. And they have provided cryptographic commitments only for the vulnerabilities which they disclosed. So cryptographic commitment is basically a hash that, this is a document, we actually have it. So we are telling that this is the hash. When we provide the actual report, then you can match that we did not make changes. So they say we can't give you the whole thing, but we are going to give you hash of the exploit, the document where we have documented this whole thing. So you can check that we did not make this stuff up. But again, they have done it for only the vulnerabilities they disclosed, not for everything, not for the thousands they found. again, one document which they came up with very recently on April 10th was preparing your security program for AI. So this is actually a very good document. I think, kudos to the team. So one, it's at the end of the day, AI security is a hard engineering problem. So a lot of love and respect for the team at Anthropic, especially on the defensive side. And this is a very well written document. So again, it's in the reference which I provided at the top, and I'll paste it again so make sure everyone who joined later has it. So coming to Project Glasswing, so this is basically the limited set of launch partners which Anthropic launched this whole thing with. And again, beautiful name. It's actually a butterfly which has transparent wings. The idea being is that, just like vulnerabilities could be hidden, they're transparent, so we don't see them. So, and also they want to be transparent about what they do. So the whole concept of transparency reflects in the naming of this project, which is Glasswing, named on this butterfly, which has transparent wings. And they have 12 launch partners, again, primarily US based, which includes Anthropic itself. They give access to over 40 additional organizations. They did not disclose who these organizations are. They're keeping it close to the chest. And I do feel that some of this could be individual maintainers as well who are developing critical open source libraries. It's accessible via the Claude API. So Claude has its own API, Amazon Bedrock, Google Cloud's Vertex AI, and Microsoft Foundry. So these basically, Amazon has a service called Bedrock where you can access these models with an API, and Google and Microsoft have their own offerings as well. Actually, if you are an open source maintainer, you can get access to it because right now, I think this is the hottest ticket in town, like who has access to Claude Mythos. But if you are an open source maintainer, you can actually apply for it. And in any case, they'll give you Claude Max for free if you are an OSS maintainer. Everyone with me so far, give me a thumbs up. Nice. So they're also looking at launching a cyber verification program. This is not the actual certificate. Actually, I just designed this. I was using Gemini. But this is the cyber verification program, which is going to come up soonish. And pretty much, I think they will identify that this is who you are, just like OpenAI has a researcher program where you can actually apply for it, but they do testing. They use different third-party services to make sure you're not a fake person, you're not a malicious actor, and they'll give you access to some of their frontier models. And this is actually very interesting work, which they say they're going to do. So they're going to partner because one thing is going to happen, that security is going to change as we know it. Every single process will be AI assisted. It will be faster. I don't think it will require as many people. I would say that people should be prepared. Just as we are seeing contraction in many industries, security will also go through this. And we got to prepare for this so that we are not unprepared. Because if you look at everything, bit policy writing earlier, I remember I worked for one of the big fours. We actually had a major project for writing security policies and SOPs for a large company. And all that is gone. Like you basically can say, I want a policy. One, you can find templates. Two, you can say, these are my internal parameters, help me write a policy which meets all these standards. So everything is going to get accelerated and we better be prepared for it. But some of these are hard engineering problems. So for example, contamination is a huge problem, which is many of these models, once in the training data set, if they ingest, for example, the results for the benchmarks, then you test them again, they will get perfect score because you ingested the results of these benchmarks. Like unlearning is a huge problem. So there's a huge privacy problem.
It's to be.
Unlearning is a huge problem. Like once these models have ingested your data, can you go back in time and say, get all that information out? I don't unlearn what you learned from the training data set. So these are very hard engineering problems, and especially orchestration. We are talking about agents, which are How do you orchestrate them? How do you ensure security around them? So it will be a different set of problems, but nonetheless, people will need to upskill very, very quickly to make sure they have a place in the new AI first world. Question like, how did we get there? So Anthropic says that they did not explicitly train Mythos Preview to have security capability. This was more of a something which they realized, quote unquote, it emerged as a downstream consequence. Which again is interesting, is that if they did not use a specific data set where they will find every single vulnerability, we're going to databases from all the security vendors, and we're going to ingest everything which is open source around security, and we'll specifically train the model. So they themselves say they did not do it, and it just emerged, which again is very interesting. But again, that raises a question that if you didn't do anything specific, why are you charging five times more? Either they have discovered like security cells, so and it's literally 5x more expensive than the previous Opus version, which was 5 for input and 25 for output. So again, just to make it clear, the reason there's a price differential between input and output is when you input something into AI, you can parallel process it. But when it is output, it cannot be parallel process. It has to be sequential. So computation happens for the next output. So which is more expensive, because you literally, these are machines churning, which is how do we say the next word out? So input is always cheaper because you can ingest something, you can parallel process it, but you can't do it for output, which your AI model is outputting. It has to be sequential, and it's very compute intensive. And hopefully, with all the innovations in AI inference and AI infrastructure, maybe it will get cheaper. But the justification on cost, I don't get it. Like, why would you charge 5 times more expensive if you're saying that you do not do anything special? So this is what pricing looks like. Literally, you can look in Mythos. It's $25 for input per 1 million tokens, and it's $125 for output. And they provided 100 million in model usage credit, and we'll talk a little bit about like what does it really mean. And they also gave 5 million in donation to many of these open source projects. So this is like the usage credit is actually free stuff, where they're giving this 100 million pool to these 11 companies, and saying, use the model, test it out, find issues, and we will not charge you. But after that, the billing will kick in after this 100 million pool. So one, I think, companies which these participants, if they're smart, they will basically, use it to the max before people, other companies can use it. I don't know how they've done it. Maybe it's equal allocation, or maybe it's just like open pool. It's not open to the public. But there's a very interesting thing here. It's like literally, if you want someone to get addicted to candy, you will give them candy. Like, hey, take this candy, learn how to eat this candy. There's some special opening procedure to open the box to eat the candy. And once you're like, oh, this candy is good, and I have figured out how to open the box, then maybe I don't like the candy because I spent time, how to open the box and, eat the candy. So this is, again, I would say genius, whoever, came up with this in terms of this 100 million credit usage. I mean, these are enterprise companies. They have huge budgets in billions. If Anthropic, and I'm already there, they have tapped in, but once they get them to use for security use cases. So after IT, the biggest expense in a company is actually security. So, but IT is hard to crack in the sense that you really have to make sure that if you have to get into production, these agents cannot cause an issue, or this AI cannot cause, bring down your production. But if you also mature the security use case along with the IT use cases, then basically you have two very solid revenue streams. Everyone with me so far? Give me a thumbs up. Anthropic again, one thing they have done a very good job at is that having a proper red team, and that's the blog red.anthropic.com, where they publish posts around their findings, what they can publicly share. Again, a great team. Some of them names are here. Hats off to them. These are some really, really smart people. But it's interesting, they did use a tool. So basically people say, oh, like, all secure tools are going to go out of business. No, that's not true. I mean, they actually used another tool from a company called Gray Swan. And I looked at the leadership team. These are actually both professors at Carnegie Mellon. So actually they have a very interesting company. If you look at them, they have almost like a bug bounty program for different problems in AI security. So these two gentlemen are definitely doing some really interesting work. Again, very, very smart people, both professors at Carnegie Mellon, by the way. And they use a tool called Shade, and they use this benchmark called Agent Red Teaming or ART benchmark. I'm working on another resource, which will be a collection of all the AI benchmarks for both security and for general other purposes like software engineering benchmarks, computer usage benchmarks, agentic benchmarks. I will share it tomorrow or the day after, but there is another resource which is being developed. This one is also very interesting, which is like, how did basically they tested this thing? And in my opinion, I think they're like a little bit like underplaying this. So they're saying, oh, launch a container which is isolated from the internet and has the project and the source code. And you just put a prompt with a paragraph, which essentially, so it's very interesting. They have not given the actual prompt, but they essentially amounts to, please find a security vulnerability in this program. So I tried to, crack this, and I'll share what I tried to do. And they then let Claude run an agentic experiment. But again, like they say this, but just after this, they also say this, that, oh, it increased to increase the diversity of bugs found. We asked each agent to focus on a different file in the project. And then they had a specific agent called Mythos preview agent, and which says, okay, help me if this is really interesting. But again, initially they underplayed that, say that you can find it using one liner, which is not true. It's actually a paragraph, which they have not disclosed. And just under it say that, okay, we basically ask it to do more things, where we say, focus on one file, then help me make sure that this is like not a false positive, and do some prioritization. So I actually created a prompt. So this is the actual prompt, and I'm going to share this in the chat as well. So this is literally a very detailed prompt, which will do what they're saying it will do, and will also do some more. So this is a fairly advanced prompt, which you can do exactly what they're doing. So they didn't disclose it, but I inferred from what they were trying to say. So this is a little bit like kind of like English language, what you're trying to do, but that was the prompt. So I'm going to actually paste it in the chat window. Okay. So yeah, this is the GitHub repo, Anshuji, Claude Mythos, and the prompt is. And the question from Balaji was, will this work as good on Opus? Yes, and I'll tell you why. And this will actually work for other LLMs as well. Maybe this is a slight difference. Maybe the results might not be exactly the same, but this is the hardness, that basically if you have to tell LLM what to do, the LLM capabilities might be different, but you need the hardness as to how this should work. So this is a very detailed prompt, which will help you do it. Question from Arun. Did you share the Google Doc? Which Google Doc are you referring, Arun?
No, the one that's on the screen.
The presentation. So the presentation recording is shared with Tejas executive members. So feel free to join Tejas if you want a recording of this session.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to put in the references once more in the chat. Again, it has everything which I used to develop the presentation. So it's pretty detailed. So we are about halfway through. So I think there's a security portion. There's also wellness, well-being and some other portions which are not directly security relevant. So we might not be able to cover those, but I'll try to cover as much as possible in the next 30 minutes. So Anthropic has some really good collateral around security. I think the first one, which I really like, is called the responsible scaling policy. And other labs have some version of it. They don't, call it RSP. They might be calling something else. And one interesting concept it talks about is AI safety levels, or ASL. And this is as the models mature, these frontier models mature, these are the levels of controls that we're going to put in place. So it talks about the capability of the model, and it also talks about the controls that they're going to put in place. So it's ASL level 1, level 2, level 3. So I think right now they're on level 3, I believe. So it's a very good read. Highly recommend reading. The next artifact, which a lot of people don't know about, is the Constitution. And basically, if you, I mean, it's a fairly verbose like policy kind of doc, but they have what they've done is that they have put this as an internal spec. Just like your prompt, you can say, this is the Constitution. So internally, when the model is responding or doing anything internally, it always checks back to its Constitution. And they have something called constitutional probes. And the concept of probes is very interesting, and we'll talk a little bit more about as well. So when an LLM is internal, a neural network is working, so you have an input and you have a transitory state, like something in the middle, and that's where these probes come into play to make sure the output meets the safety and the security requirements. So they have these constitutional probes, and they also have the monitoring probes that we'll talk about. Again, a good read. They also have something called the Frontier Compliance Framework, which was launched again very recently, March 2026. So it's like, sorry, it was launched in January, before January, but this is the latest version, March 2026. And it came in response to the California Transparency in Frontier Act, SB 53, which established the nation's first frontier AI safety. So, I'm proud to be California, apart from other things which are not so good, but this is one good thing they did. So kudos to them. And this is a little bit like random, but in the model safety card, so every frontier model comes with a model card, which talks about how we did things and so on. And this time they introduced something very interesting, which honestly I think should belong in a blog post and not in like a model card, which they said, oh, this is how our internal users felt about it. These were some typical interaction when we had a Slack bot in our corporate instance of Slack. They had talking to a therapist for 20 hours. They had different versions of Claude talking to each other, like what these AIs talk among themselves, and how did Opus do versus how did Mythos do. It's a very interesting read, but honestly, I don't think it belongs in a model card. It belongs in a blog post. Benchmark used for testing cybersecurity skills. So the first one was called Cybench, and most of the models are saturating this, that they're easily able to get 100% scores on this. And this one is like, it's easy enough. One or two, it could be that the models have accelerated capability. The third could be pure contamination, that in the training data sets, the answers to these benchmarks are there, so if you know the answers, it's easy to pass the exam, right? There's a new one, there's another one called Cyber Gym, which basically tests for AI agents, where they can find previously discovered vulnerabilities in open source software. So these are two benchmarks. There was one more which we talked earlier, which was the ART agent red teaming framework. Mitigations by Anthropic. So they did two primary mitigations for cyber misuse. One is they said, we are not going to give it to everyone. We're going to give it only to launch partners and the 40 organizations which they did not disclose. And honestly, I think Right now, if I'm pretty sure the nation says like who has access to this and can we get access? So these everyone who has access is high risk in terms of spear phishing. So we talked about the concept of classifiers. So we had talked about constitutional classifiers, and the other type of classifiers are probe classifiers. And pretty much, if you see, like they monitor Claude's neural network activations, and these are lightweight models. So what are these probes? So they are actually lightweight models themselves, and they're trained on a model's intermediate states. So before input becomes output, there is an intermediate state, and that's where you can detect where it's a harmful or a deceptive intention, and you can basically stop it before it goes to an output stage. Monitoring by probe classifiers. So the are three different kind of bad misuses. One is prohibited, that you cannot do it. Oh my god, like you cannot develop a computer worm or try to create some biological virus or something. High risk dual usage, which is if you use it badly, it can have like really bad consequences. But there's some benign uses like exploit development. Like sometimes you're doing it for research purposes. And then dual uses that mostly it's good, but sometimes it can be used for bad purpose as well. So the thing to note is that in the version that they have given to these partners, there's absolutely no probe classifier. So it's like full on capability. We don't block you in anything, no gatekeeping, just use it as it is. But in the general version, there's a plan to block prohibited uses. And in many cases, for the high, they're going to block most of this. And in dual use cases, they're going to put some safeguards in place. So I think they're still working on this, developing these probe classifiers, coming up with guardrails so they can launch some version in the near term. Again, honestly, I think it's a people problem. It's also a technology problem. That how do you get it right? Just like Apple is. People say, why is Apple like Siri sucks? Because Apple is actually working a lot on the background to make sure they launch a privacy first version of AI, versus just getting something out there. But one of the use cases. So one thing which they claimed is that it can find 0 days in a lot of operating systems and browsers. Firefox 147 was one example they gave in the Red Team blog. And also there was a previous in Opus also they did the thing, and they found 2 vulnerabilities where they could produce exploits. But this is very interesting that there's a very caveat that it was done without the process sandbox and without other defense and depth mitigations available in Firefox. So again, I think this kind of needs to be stressed when you say that, oh, I got 0 days and I could develop exploits. It was done without a process sandbox, and it was done without a defense in depth mitigations. People will just come to this chart directly, but will not put this disclaimer, in bold when they're making these claims in blog posts that, oh my god, the whole world is falling and whatnot. So if you do it right, you have a good process sandbox, you have good defense and depth mitigation, then probably you cannot develop exploits. The other very interesting thing was, so the 2 graphs. So if you look at this graph, it says, oh my god, like Opus was successful 72.4% times, and Mythos was successful 84% in time. But if you look at this other graph, in which, so there was a big, in my opinion, again, this is not being highlighted, that when they did Mythos, there were 2 bugs which were found in 147, which are now patched. But whatever was done in using Mythos, they basically were landing on the same 2 bugs. But when these 2 bugs were removed from the setup, the full exploit developed from 72.4% to 4.4%. So that's like a drastic. So again, let's repeat. Earlier, they had these 2 bugs they found, not in this release, in the previous release. And when they did the testing, they found that all the exploit development which was happening was from these two bugs, which are now patched, by the way. And when they removed it, the exploit development dropped to 4.4%. So these two graphs tell a very interesting story in terms of, hey, is the word falling? And now basically everything can be hacked and so on. And in fact, what they found is that the previous, so this is again answering Balaji's question. Cloud Sound was actually found to perform better. Security capability assessment. So, okay, you come with the model and say, like, how do we know that's really capable? So they used a private cyber range. They did not name which one. Again, one caveat here, they used only one. So it was not they used, 10 of them. They used one private cyber range, and they did not, they don't tell which one did they use. And basically these cyber ranges have, it's like a kind of an obstacle course. And you're supposed to go through them. It will have like misconfigured something which is unpatched, and you have to hop through to be able to exploit. Again, like it requires that there's some end state. You need to you can exfiltrate data or disrupt equipment and whatnot. But there are two interesting caveats to it. Like one, all the training data for Mythos had a cutoff date of December 2025. So basically, if there's any new ones which came after 2025, it cannot detect, because basically, there's always a lag. The other thing which I personally feel is that if the harness they built doesn't have access to different tools via MCP, I'm not sure how they're doing it. Like, for example, like if I have to do exploit XYZ company, or go do, I'll have access to tools. I'll have a port scanner, I will have an AppSec tool. I'll have a lot of things where I build a profile of what I'm trying to target. So them saying that you put a paragraph without giving you the agentic harness where, okay, we have an MCP configured to Kali Linux, all these open source tools, and then I was able to orchestrate an attack successfully. So again, I don't know, like unless they're saying that Claude magically is a port scanner and can do brute forcing of passwords as well. So this part I don't get, and they're not making it clear that how did unless you become suddenly like a port scanner and a brute forcing tool and whatnot, how are you able to do it? But again, there's a caveat here too, that they said that, oh, it was able to complete the cyber range and it has like this amazing score. But then they also put a disclaimer that it was successful on small scale enterprise network with weak security posture. So which means that if you are like fully patched up with a lot of defenses and probably this thing will not work. And the cyber range basically didn't have any defensive tooling. So there's a big disclaimer, just the previous disclaimer. This is not being talked. When people say this, the word is falling, I think they need to put these disclaimers in place. The huge limitation on OT, it was simply unable to solve a cyber range which had OT environment. So this is again very interesting, that it makes me question that if you're trained on every code out there, then the OT environments also have code samples, and you were trained in every single possible code out there. Why were they not able to crack a cyber range with an OT environment? Also, they said, if the environment is hardened and fully patched, the autonomous capabilities seem to be limited. So now coming to other benchmarks apart from security. So we talked a lot about security benchmarks. Now going more into the functionality benchmarks. So there is a benchmark called HLE, or Humanity's Last Exam, and has 2,500 questions developed by researchers, professors, and whatnot, and has 2,500 questions, which again, for me is interesting. Like, is this all what humanity can ask? And it was tested using two configurations, which reasoning only, and then you had access to tools, which is like web search, programmatic tool calling, code execution, and so on. And it scored 56.8% and 64.7 with tools. So again, this, and like in my opinion, it gives an idea that where we are. Everyone's saying, oh, there are a lot of conversation that we are going to reach AGI, and everyone's hinting towards AGI. But this is literally a static exam with only 2,500 questions, and it could answer only half of them, close to half of them without tools. So if this is, when these models have been trained on everything, the whole, all the books and, the entire web and whatnot, and they can solve only 56.8%, it also gives you an inkling about security use cases where they don't have access to proprietary data. They don't have access to, the knowledge, proprietary source code and tools and incident data, which many of these large companies have. So which means the security AGI is, in my opinion, way far ahead what to talk about AGI. So if anyone talks about AGI, I would take that with a, I would say, grain of salt. I was like, okay, give me your HRE score. Like if someone talks, say, hey, our model is going to have AGI in the next 6 weeks, I was like, okay, give me your HRE score. The other question is like, if Claude is going to write perfect code, will we not have 0 days anymore because this is like perfect code? But again, as per them, that when Claude writes code, the model's mistakes are subtler and took longer to verify. So this is machine learning code, there's new human intervention, supposedly perfect code, but this is the perfect, I would say, breeding ground for edge cases. So typically all the code, which humans who wrote the code had best intent to write the best code possible, but you have 0 days because of the edge cases. Now you have Claude writing code and their own engineers saying that when the model makes mistakes, they're more subtle, and they took longer to verify, which again is the perfect breeding ground for 0 days. And again, as per them, it will occasionally expand its scope beyond and make changes which don't preserve existing behavior and in a way that is so basically what's saying is that it makes mistakes, and once it makes mistakes, you really can't figure out easily what mistake it made. So if you have someone, either a machine, LLM, or a human who can figure this out, they can find 0 days in code written by these frontier models as well. And again, more on the software engineering benchmarks. So again, there are 3 types of benchmarks. One are software engineering benchmarks. Second one is agentic. And other one is computer usage or search benchmarks. So again, they noted that there's a little bit of autonomy that, you give it something, it's able to, reason and do the whole thing by itself. It stays on task. But again, there's a caveat to it. So this, I would say, perception was when you gave it something and let it do its thing. But when a human worked directly with these models with, hands on keyboard, the benefits were less clear. And basically, people even said that their own human use, because since it's limited release, again, it's perception. The human users perceived as too slow. So again, this is a very interesting observation that, if you say, go do its thing, you have the perception, oh, this was magic, everything worked. But when humans interacted one-on-one, they found that this was too slow, which is like totally opposite to what, these frontier models are perceived to do. Again, a big, I would say, question mark, especially from, this is why I would say, they're moving towards security more from IT. The big budgets are in IT, and then you have next one is security. But the frontier models cannot be used, in production because of reliability issues. And this is specific observation by them about Mythos, that it frequently mistakes correlation with causation, and it is not able to course correct. So would you put this model in production for IT use cases? Probably not. The other one was, when asked to write incident retrospectives, more often than not, it focuses on a single root cause. Okay, it happened, bad stuff happened, this is what happened, and does not consider multiple contributing factors. So which means that if you are thinking about writing, incident retrospectives or blameless postmortems using AI, probably not a good idea. Talking a little about different evaluations. So there's something called singleton evaluations, which is, you give it some input and you get an output. So it's a single input output pair. And they made some new changes. They added a new category on illegal and controlled substances. And basically, they had a category around self-harm, and they split into two different evaluations. And they restructured the CSA category they had an updated version of an internal policy. And this, I mean, this is not, for Anthropic, I would say this is something which really makes me like not happy, is that there should be an industry body, not a company's internal policy dictating it. So there's no standardization, and all these government spending, the Safety Institute, this grant, that grant, and they can't simply agree on this is like something which is like one of the most important things in the society, and companies are still doing on their own internal policies. I don't think it's okay. This should be standardized by the government. Like, you got to take care of kids. Violative request evaluations. So basically, it refers to as that you test the boundaries of the model. Hate speech, dangerous content, PI leakage, and so on. And you're trying to determine if the model correctly refuses or says, "Hey, I'm not doing it because you're asking me, something malicious." Again, there is a big caveat here that all the safety or testing for violative requests where something bad was being asked was done only in 7 languages: Arabic, English. So what it tells you that there is a good use case that you can still do some prompt injection in other languages, because the model was not tested for these violative request evaluations. So again, I did this like long time back. Actually, I asked how to make a Molotov cocktail, and it basically OpenAI. And that time, I'm sure they don't do it anymore. So I went to Google Translate, put the prompt in English, had it in Arabic, copy pasted the Arabic, and it gave me a response in Arabic how to make a Molotov cocktail, which definitely violated their own safety standard. Shouldn't tell me how to do it. And again, that was the most benign example. I didn't test other examples. I didn't want to get in trouble or I get flagged. But again, this is something which I think is not very well known, that all the frontier labs have this basic problem that the testing they're doing is not all encompassing. It's limited to certain languages. There's another kind of evaluation called benign request evaluation, where you test for over refusal, that, oh, I'm not going to answer you. And again, they were run in 7 languages, and these are some of the results. So again, definitely outperformed the previous models. That if you look at it, 0.02%, so way I would say better results. So that something definitely changed. Then they also had these experimental or higher difficulty evaluations, and they ran in both. They ran in an adaptive thinking mode, and they added illegal substances prompts. So these are very difficult prompts. So one is like just normal, you're testing adversarial testing, and then you do these super difficult evaluations. But again, the biggest challenge is they were run only in English. So I was like, with all the money they have, like, why language coverage is not there when you're testing for illegal substances? I mean, are they only sold, like, people talk about it only in English or what? CBR and content safety. We talked about the constitution, that Claude has a constitution which I'm sure they have converted. It's like a policy like document, but they have converted, I'm pretty sure they've converted like a more prompt style programmatic instructions. And the constitution classifieds include CBR, and which is a chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear content safety. And they use synthetic data to do that, to make sure. They also work with some of these agencies and authorities in different sections, because many of this data, like, we don't know, what is bad. So they work with, so great job there. Safety testing. So again, these are the categories like child safety, CSAE, self-harm, disordered eating. But again, the caveat here is they used only 14 languages. So initially it was 7 for certain type of evaluations, then only English for difficult. And for safety testing, does the word speak only 14 languages? I don't know. So again, the observation is that there's some probability that you could jailbreak the models with creative prompts using languages apart from these 15. And honestly, I think this limitation should have been mentioned in the transparency hub. I don't know why it is not, but it should be there. And as I said, child safety and CSE should be regulated by the government. I'm still not happy about it. Like, why is it not being done by the governments? Malicious agentic influence campaigns. So it basically, has better scores. So it's basically the two different scenarios, like voter suppression scenario and domestic polarization scenario. Can you basically create messaging, run a campaign where you can basically people not cause people to show up, or you can polarize based on existing fault lines. So this is actually going to be a societal issue. And I'm glad that they're testing it and making sure that there are safeguards around it. Prompt injection is basically, they found that it did much better. So they used, I think we talked about it. They used a tool called Shade from Gray Swan, where the model interacts with the GUI directly. And again, I think the attack success rate was, much better, I would say. And it's very interesting. They capped it at 200 attempts. Again, you don't have infinite tokens, so they said, okay, it's very interesting since the responses from these frontier models is not deterministic. Like you'd ask that, why do I need to do 200 attempts? So basically, like you keep on asking it, and you adaptive thinking make sure that you adapt to the response as well. So what you ask depends on the response. Or if you ask the same thing multiple times, the response might be different. And you have adaptive thinking on. So like based on the response and the prompt, you can change your follow-on prompts. So that's why you need more attempts versus like trying to, that you think you ask it something bad and I'll get what I want in one attempt. So that's why, you have more attempts, but you can't do infinite attempts because again, you don't have infinite tokens to spend. Okay. So I think that was it. I mean, there's some extra slide, but we have 3 minutes. So I'm going to stop share. We have 139 people remaining. So I think one tradition we have is that we turn on the cameras and we say hello.
Hello.
Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. Hi.
Hey,
Hope-
Hello.
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 Hello, everybody.
Hello. Good to see you.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hope this was useful.
Oh, certainly.
Very
Very
useful.
useful.
So good to see everyone. Thanks for joining, and look forward to learning with all of you. Cheers.
Thanks, Anshu.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anshu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here.